You're listening to TeaLife Audio, a podcast about the Japanese way of tea and related arts. For show notes and other resources, go to tealife.audio.
Welcome to episode 160. My name is Marius.
And I'm TJ.
It's a rare mix.
Yeah, it's true.
It's the first time for just the two of us.
Yeah, I think so, but thanks for making the time. I'm excited to be here and excited about what we're going to talk about. This is an interesting topic that you've been bringing up of sort of these subtle and not so subtle differences between the different lineages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's nice because often when you do study and you get very set in your way and like, oh, no, you can't do that. That is totally wrong. And then you notice that a different school is like, no, that's how we teach it.
Yeah.
So maybe it can be done that way then.
Yeah,
so I think it's good for...
My teacher always says, oh, it's not wrong. I'm sure there's some school of tea that says you do it that way.
Yeah, I think that's a good perspective on it.
Yeah, I do too. And, you know, the amazing thing that I've learned over the years, because here in Colorado, I do tea with Urasenke people all the time as an Omotesenke practitioner. And as long as the host knows what they're doing, and as long as the guests kind of know what they're doing, it really doesn't cause major problems. I think the only time we ever really have to worry is if someone decides that they're going to do Suzuki Usu, then you got to have a first guest that's in the same school, because we have a little bit different way of doing the haiken for Suzuki Usu than you guys do. But otherwise, basically, everything's fine.
I did attend a chaji once with a Sokoryu host, and I was not supposed to be the first guest, but the first guest had to step out of the room, and that was just in the end of the food service. So in Urasenke we have this, why don't you join us? Bring your own tray and come sit with us. And that was apparently not the thing to say in Ura Sokoryu. So the poor host almost got a heart attack with like, what? Is he expecting me to come into the room? But she answered exactly what is the standard for Urasenke. It's like, no, sorry, can't do that. I have too many things to do in the kitchen.
Yeah, we have that same thing in Omotesenke, and I always feel like it's a little disingenuous, right? Because there are several moments in Chaji where the script tells us to ask something, and the script also tells the host to decline, and it's just kind of, why are we doing this? We all know what the answer is going to be, and so I'm always really happy when people do come in.
If you have only one guest, then the standard is to come in, right? But I'm also imagining if you have a full kitchen staff, like I guess the original people had, then maybe, yeah, sure, I could do that. I can eat with you for part of the meal, but then I go get some other things.
Yeah, and I think my memory is what I've heard Adam say in past episodes is they don't have kitchen help, generally, in Ueda Soko.
I think he just emphasized that you should be able to do it without kitchen help.
I see.
And then I think most schools, if you have serious students, should strive for to be able, like, yes, you can do everything yourself. Mm-hmm. But of course, if you're doing it with a group and you have 10 people, 5 guests, 5 hosts, then you will have a kitchen staff to cook the food and do things. But I also think that it's a good thing to practice to do it yourself and rather figure out what can I serve and make do alone.
Yeah, I did a chaji once alone, but it was only 2 guests, and that was manageable. I don't know that I could have pulled it off with 5 guests, just the movement in and out of the room and trying to keep the kitchen from lighting itself on fire might have been too much.
I think the key there is to pick food that is easy to deal with.
Yeah, so that, absolutely.
A lot can be pre-done.
Yeah, that's very true too. Very, very true.
Okay, let's dive into Omotesenke guest etiquette.
Yeah, great. So I guess one thing that helps me sort of orient to this is that I've been to several urachajis, and I do notice immediate differences. Seems like the gathering early on in the sort of machiai space is basically the same. My experience has been that Omote people might be less inclined to ask about like the water cups and things like that are in the front room. But we have all of it. It's just I've noticed a lot of times those things don't get asked about once guests come into the room, which always kind of interests me. But that could just be a preference of the particular shokyakus that I've been around. When I'm with Ura people, they always ask about those things, and I think I've kind of picked that up as my own habit because it's nice. I like to know what everything is and know if it has any special provenance. I don't really remember there being much difference in the garden, in the roji, or around the tsukubai. Some of the differences really probably do show up once you enter the chashitsu itself. Maybe the first thing that people really notice is Omotesenke, we take 3 steps per half mat. So we take smaller steps than you guys do. And that
we only get 2.
Right. And for Western bodies, 2 is actually really sufficient, I think. But so for a lot of us, we have to kind of shorten our stride in the tea room if we're doing omote style. I guess since it's row, let's talk about a difference
which is the question about the walking.
Yeah.
Because in Urasenki you cross with your fukusa foot when you're going down, which often gets interpreted to the left foot. Right, but the proper thing is the fukusa foot. And then you cross with the non-fukusa foot when you're going up into the tea room. Do Omotesenke do the same?
Seems like
lines, I'm thinking about that.
Yeah, seems like it's basically the same, though my experience is that there's a lot less emphasis placed on for the guests, whether they're moving left or right. The host is very prescribed in terms of which foot moves where at what time, but for guest etiquette, I just don't hear it talked about as a general rule. That doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Some teachers might use it, but for example, my teacher has never really pushed on, well, when you get up from here, you need to step left first or you need to step right first. You know, the bigger concern is 3 steps and not stepping on lines and things like that. But, you know, interestingly, I would say you do end up seeing it in some moments when you cross through the tea room, when you're doing your haiken and you enter Temaiza. Generally, you know, if we've entered as host with left foot, then we should enter Temaiza with right foot. And that seems to be the case even when guests are moving around for the haiken, that we enter the Temaiza with right foot. But that has more to do with the fact that you entered the room with your left foot. And when you come through the Nijiriguchi...
So are there any rules in... But is there any rules for entering the room in Omotesenke? Is it different foots or is it...
For the host always enters left foot first.
Okay.
And when
that would be different.
When you come through the Nijiriguchi, my tendency is to, when I stand up and start moving, I move left foot first, just because that's how I'm used to entering the tea room. And yeah, is that different for you guys?
Yeah, so in a normal setup, the host would enter with the right foot, going upwards in the tea room. So you're coming from the lower place of the kitchen, and then right foot into the higher space, and then right foot across the line into Temaisa, if you didn't step directly out on it.
Yeah, so when I come into the tea room as a host, I enter left foot, turn to close the door, and when I stand up, my left foot goes to the line, and I step into Temaisa right foot.
Okay.
So similar, maybe, once you get into Temaisa. So the guests move with left foot. I've just never encountered this in Urasenke, but I'm not paying attention. I'm not in Urasenke Keiko, so I don't know. Once the guest has sort of knelt and dealt with their haiken of the tokonoma, if the first guest is already in the room, and especially if they're already seated, because we don't wait and all seat ourselves in the same way that Urasenke does, that determines what you do to get up from the tokonoma. If the first guest is already sort of seated, you open your knee to the right so that you open towards the first guest, and then that allows you to stand up and continue turning so that you don't turn your back to the first guest. If no one's in the room, you open left knee. So if in a standard room, that means you open towards the tokobashira, and then stand up and continue your movement in that direction, which, because there's nobody there to worry about turning your back to. Since it's Ro, let's talk about one thing that I think is a difference. When we go over into Temaisa, we haiken the kama and the Ro first, and then we turn to do the tana, if there's a tana in the room. Isn't that the other way around for you guys?
Only for Koicha, if I understand correctly. That you would start with the chaide, and then you would do from there. But if there's nothing there, you would start with the kama.
I see. Okay, that's interesting. I didn't know that was the distinction. So yeah, for us, it's always the kama first during Ro, and then we turn to look at whatever's actually in Temaisa. The guests, like the seating of the guests, or the point where they take their seat, is a little variable in Omotesenke. The guests can sort of line up along the wall, or once people are sort of in the room, the first guest may move over and start taking their seat immediately. We don't all wait and move as one group and sit as one group. So in Omotesenke, the host really is reliant strictly on that sliding of the feet to know that everybody has come in. Of course, we close the nijiriguchi firmly, just like most schools do once the last guest is in. But in terms of knowing that everyone has been seated, we're really listening for the silence. I've noticed in Urasenke that there's that sort of simultaneous descent and landing for everybody, which does help, I think, for the host, actually. It's a useful sound cue that you guys have. The haiken conversation and the greeting with the host, as far as I remember, is pretty much the same. And then the sumidemai in furrow, we don't really go up and look at the arrangement after sumi, which I seem to remember you guys do, right? In the furrow?
And just thinking. I'm wondering if... No, I'm on thin ice, but I remember maybe that's only for Go-Sumi in furrow. But in Raw, it's definitely there.
Yeah,
I do Sumi way too seldom.
We go up and look during row. All the guests slide forward and gather around the row, but there's no appreciation of the fire or the charcoal in furrow. in Omotesenke. The meal is pretty much the same as you guys, as far as I've been able to tell, until we get to Hasen and Chidori. Our Chidori is a little different from yours. For one thing, this is a great story. So we had a large gathering at my teacher's house. This was probably 6 or 7 years ago. And a couple of our Ura friends joined. And we had it was full kaiseki, everything. We were really trying to focus on meal study. And one of the Ura people was first guest. And when it came time for the Chidori portion, my teacher was actually the person serving sake. And when our Ura friend wiped the sake cup, my teacher's from Kyoto, and she smiled and very graciously said, "That's beautiful. Would you really clean it, please?" Because we actually wipe the sake cup with kaishi. We really wipe it. And you guys have this beautiful sort of gesture that you do to clean the sake cup. And it was so funny when she said, "Oh, that's beautiful. Now would you really clean it?"
Is it the same thing that the first round the host serve all the guests get sake, and then on the second round the host also gets sake?
That's
that
right.
The same?
That's right. Except in Urasenke, in the second round, the first guest doesn't drink immediately. They jump the first guest, and that's not the case in Omotesenke. So there's just a little bit of difference in that behavior with the first guest and the last guest. Because I think in Urasenke, the last guest has to drink twice to reset the back and forth, and then the host goes back to the shokyaku. And in Omotesenke, it's a little more first guest drinks and then they pour for the host, right? It's very straightforward.
I think for Ura, it is the same. It's just that you start with the second guest, and then the first guest becomes the last to drink.
I see. Okay. Yeah, I think we start with first guest. Truthfully, Chidori is... I've done Urasenke Chidori far more times than I've done Omotesenke Chidori, because my Ura friends really, really like to do Chidori, and my Omote community tends to be a little bit less... Either everyone is older and therefore doesn't drink anymore, or they're all young and cannot drink. So we just don't do Chidori as often in the strictly Omote groups that I'm around. And, one of my closest tea friends is kind of a Chidori wizard. So we do, and she's she's Urasenke. So we do Urasenke Chidori quite often. And I'm a lightweight. In America, we call it a cheap date. And I can't... 5 shots of sake, I'm gone. So, generally speaking, I'm not the host for Chidori, because that pretty much takes me out for the rest of the chaji.
I think that is where the guest should show consideration and not fill the sake cup to the brim. Yeah. Presumably every guest knows the host, and they know that, 1 cup and he's out. Okay, so let him have a fourth of a sip in this cup then.
Yeah.
And then in total you get one of those saucers worth of sake.
Yeah, we did an event. This was it was the summer before COVID. And isn't it funny? We all sort of... That's the new marker in time, before COVID, after COVID. The summer before COVID, I was house sitting in this huge, like 3-story house, and the people had moved out of the state, so the house was totally empty. And the bottom floor was just these big, huge wooden floored rooms, beautiful house. And we did a big Tanabata gathering that summer, and we used that main floor, and we set up in the great room in the house, and we had 20 guests, and it was about half Omotesenke and half Urasenke, and we set up mats straight down either side of the room, and we had one Omote host and one Urasenke host, and we called it dueling Chidori. So we had 2 hosts running down either side of the room doing their style of Chidori simultaneously. It was really, really nice. It was really cool to see how that worked. We had a really great time. So yeah, the Chidori is just slightly, like I always tell people, it's just different enough to make you feel super confused if you've studied both. You know, just different enough. After Chidori, yeah, I mean, the kaiseki run's basically the same. In Omotesenke, we tend not to recover the dishes every time the host comes in. Not quite as strictly as I've seen with Urasenke friends. But we do stop eating, right? If the host comes in, everybody stops eating. We just may not always recover the rice and the soup. After the meal is done, same as you guys, we would have sweets. And do you guys use like a lidded jubako?
Yes, the normal omogashi sweet food, I think, is the stacked boxes.
Right, same for us. I mean, Fujidaka is the like most formal, but we can use just like a lidded, one-level lidded box with, you know, kuromoji on top, like 2 kuromoji like chopsticks. But it seems like none of my Ura friends here have anything lidded except for the Fujidaka. They all have like open containers.
Yeah. I think that's the more normal for chakais. If you're going to serve an omogashi for a chakai type of event, that it will come in some big unlidded container with chopsticks.
Okay, so we often use a lid on that vessel, right? So we have we have to handle the lid. You can either
Does
take
the lid go on and off or sent down the line?
We have both options. It just depends on what the first guest wants to do. So often it seems like it's easier if you take the lid off, look at it, and pass it, because that sort of occupies the other guests while the box is slowly moving. I think that's a little nicer personally. It gives them something to do while they're waiting. But you can look at it yourself, put it to the side, serve your sweet, put the lid back on, put the chopsticks back on, and pass the whole thing. And same behavior as everywhere. What I presume is everyone else. If there's someone to your right side, you say, "I will join you." If there's someone to your left side, you say, "Excuse me for going first," and then you acknowledge the host for giving it to you. And then we have a break after sweets, right? We get to go back out into the garden. Same bell ringing as you guys have to bring people back in after the break. And then Koicha. So this is one place where we do have a major difference. Omotesenke, really across the board, seems to be more gender. There are more gendered differences than I've seen in Urasenke. So Koicha is one place where that shows up. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff for the host that is different, but there's difference in guest behavior, particularly during Koicha.
Interesting.
Yeah, so you guys pass Koicha hand to hand, no matter what. In Omotesenke, that only happens between two men. So man passing to woman, woman passing to man, woman passing to woman. The bowl is taken off of the dashibuksa and passed on the floor with the dashibuksa next to it. And of course, we also use dashibuksa instead of kobuksa. So,
so the dashibuksa, is that like 4 times the size?
That's right. Yeah, it's the same size as normal fukusa. Same size as a normal fukusa.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Which, I mean, it's lovely, it feels very rich and very sumptuous, and it's also 4 times as expensive.
Yeah, I've heard it called obuksa in other contexts.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But it gives it a nice heft, I think.
It does, and we use dashibuksa with everything, including raku. So we always put out dashibuksa for koicha. So yeah, the koicha comes out, same sort of behavior as in urasenke. The first guest goes up and retrieves it, brings it back. We do not have the ofukusa haishaku itashimasu that you guys do. It's just assumed.
I hate it. I said it in the last episode. I truly hate that.
Well, we just assume we're using it, so there's no sort of commentary on it. And everything gets put between the first and second guest with the dashibuksa off to the left of the chawan and all of the guests sore, and then they begin the drinking. Same as you guys, while the first guest is wiping the bowl, the second guest begins their sort of silent osakini. And, I guess how we clean the bowl is also different. You guys have that amazing little wet folded up thing. We just take a regular kaishi and turn it from a rectangle to a square, and then we fold down one corner like a little triangle, and we wipe the bowl, and then we turn the kaishi and fold down another little corner and wipe the bowl, and we do that 3 times with a dry kaishi. It is a little different from what you guys do. It means we don't have to carry the little pouch to deal with the wet. But I also think, having used your cleaning method when I was at Chaji in Japan with Urasenke people, they provided those because it was a big, big gathering. They're very nice. You guys have very nice. That's very nice.
And actually, I don't use that. I adopted Ueda Sokuryu to use hanshi instead. So I don't use any kaishi. I just use folded hanshi. And then you can just wipe it. And you can it absorbs it so good. So you can just curl it into a ball and put the thing in your sleeve, and there's no problem.
Wow.
So if anyone wants to try that, I highly recommend it. It's so you end up with like one big that is a little bit bigger than a Urasenke Kaishi, that is the folded hanshi, and then you have one that is an eighth of an hanshi, that is an folded up many times, and then you have those eighths. You can also cut them free. So you get 3 types of paper that is actually the same, or 3 sizes of paper that you carry. And those thinnest one, which is it's just the size 1/8 of an hanshi, but just 1 layer of paper. They are excellent at wiping the tea bowl.
I'll have to try that. That sounds really efficient, which is good.
And it feels more, to me, it feels more authentic than the highly machined kaishi that we're using.
So yeah, if it's man to man, then you set everything. Like if the next guest is, if the person drinking is male and the next person is male, you set the whole thing down and clean it, and then you turn the bowl back so the drinking spot goes to the side. Now we drink from 3 o'clock instead of from 12 o'clock on the bowl. We drink from the side, not the back. So you turn the bowl back so that the front is facing you. You pick the whole thing back up again, and you pass all of it hand to hand if it's male to male. If it's male to female, female to male, or female to female, after you drink, you take the bowl off of the dashibuksa and set it down, close the dashibuksa, put that down, wipe the bowl, and then you turn it back so that the front faces you, pass the bowl over, pass the dashibuksa around to the left side, and then those two people bow as the sending and receiving bow with the chawan between them on the ground. Let's see, getting through koicha, our questions for, the first guest to the host while that's happening are pretty much the same as anywhere else. After the last guest drinks, they just automatically bring the chawan back. There's no request for them to bring it back.
Makes
it's just
sense.
assumed. So they bring everything back, and then the haiken begins. So this is another difference. Our haiken looks a little different. We haiken things inside the line, not outside the line. And Omotesenke does not have the emphasis placed on shingyo and so as a general rule. It's just not... those things are present. We just tend not to talk about them or highlight them as much as you find in Urasenke. So we don't have this distinction between when we're doing haiken or when we're talking to the host, is this a shin bow, a gyo bow, or a so bow? They're all just pretty much the same. And we don't have the sort of set the item out and look at it from a distance that you guys do. We set the object, whatever it is, directly in front of us inside the line. And first we kind of lean to the right and lean to the left and then back to the right, sort of looking at it as it sits. And then we can come down and pick it up and hold it and look at it. And then it goes back down and we do the same right, left, right as our sort of goodbye to the object. And then it gets passed over and still within the line. The whole haiken really happens on the guest side of the line. And we look at, so when I pick up chashaku, I never set it down to look at it. Once I pick it up, it stays in my hands. I look at it in my hands, and then I pass it over inside the line between me and the next person. Same thing with a shifuku.
Efficient.
Or with the dashibuksa. So fabric gets only handled, and the chashaku gets only handled. We don't set things out away from us and look at them on the mat, except for we set the chawan down and look at it on the mat, and we set down the chaide or the uski and look at those on the mat, but generally the fabrics get held in our hands and passed along. And then the other big difference as a sort of standard is the dei. So when the host and when the first guest and the last guest meet and the last guest returns everything to the first guest does a second haiken of whatever they've received. And there are two schools of thought.
You didn't break it, did you?
That's one school of thought. Yes. There are these two schools of thought about why we have this sort of second haiken for the first guest. One is to make sure that everything is still safe, intact, no damage was done, because the first guest is technically responsible for these objects when the host is out of the room. The other logic is that, I think as Aaron said, if I remember right, when I listened to the Urasenke guest etiquette episode, in Chaji, we are seeing things that we may never see again. And they could be actually incredibly precious objects. And the idea that the first guest gets the chance to have a second look is actually a really nice thing, So it could just be the first guest is taking their chance before they hand it all back over to look at it one more time before they're taken away. And then the first guest returns everything, and then we have the Heiken questions just like we normally would. Let's see. After that, if it's formal chaji, would have gozumi, just as you would. In furo, this is getting into host behavior, but we don't bring in the haiki in furo for either shozumi or gozumi. We don't tinker with the ash that's in the furo. We do it during ro, but not during furo. So we don't have I always say the magic
Skipping.
when you move the little bit to the back that I've seen in Urasenke. That doesn't happen in Omotesenke. And so therefore no Heiken of any charcoal in furo for gozumi either. And then uscha, I'm trying to think if there's really any major difference in guest behavior during uscha. Not really. As I said, if it's Suzuki Usu, there is a difference in guest behavior. In Urasenke, you guys ask for the chaide and the shifuku sort of around the time the first bowl comes out of uscha, right? And then the second guest drinks that first bowl of uscha because the first guest goes up to retrieve those items. In Omotesenke, everything gets asked for at the end. We don't put out the chaide early. So for Suzuki uscha, it just runs like a normal uscha. And I guess the other thing that happens during uscha that generally when I'm with my Ura friends doesn't happen is that we bring out zabuton during uscha in most cases. But I don't know if that's just my Ura friends don't do it or if it's an Ura thing not to.
I think it's an option. Not often practiced in Okeiko, I think. But you come out with a tabakobon and other things to relax the guest. This is like you did the highlight. Now it's time to wind down before you go home.
Right. So seems like in Omotesenke the zabuton for uscha is pretty standard practice. It comes out, as you say, when tabakobon comes out, then zabuton and sweets come out. So and I get that's another piece. The tabakobon, in my experience, doesn't get nearly as much interest and attention in Omotesenke as I've seen it get with my Ura friends. They tend to pass it around and look at it and talk about it and ask questions about it, and Omote people tend to just put it in the corner and forget about it for some reason. That's been my experience, is most of my Omote friends are like, oh yeah, that's there, just leave it alone. But uscha seems to run pretty much standard, just as you guys, and I can't think at the moment of any real difference between male and female behavior during uscha, so I think it's pretty much the same. And then departure, basically the same stuff. We're just moving through the room with 3 steps instead of 2, and the differences, especially on the guest side, other than the handling of koicha, is pretty. The differences are pretty minor. Hosting differences are a little bit more pronounced.
Yeah. But thank you. That was a good run through.
Yeah. It seems like the majority of our differences, both as guest and host, tend to be related to the gender stuff in Omotesenke. And
I know that on the host side, there are a few. So like for Yusucha, I believe you have the misotashi in the center of the tatami when you open the door.
That's right.
So you would you would see if it's urasenke or omotesenke even before the host comes into the room.
That's right. We put everything in front of us. Yeah.
Yeah, and the fabulous snapping that we only get to do in like some very specific tema.
Yeah, and even that, so that chiriyuchi snap, men do it every time they fold fukusa. Women only do it, so it's a complicated way to describe it, but for women, if they're taking the fukusa off of their obi, then the first time they fold it, they do the chiriyuchi. If they continue to open it and refold it from there, they just like pantomime it, but they don't make the noise unless it has gone back on their obi. And then when they take it off the obi again, then the first time they fold, they can do the chiriyuchi again. But they do it fewer times. And also cleaning chaide and cleaning usuki is different for women in Omotesenke. Women don't rotate the chaide. They just do like a dobuki, sort of wiping down the side. So they clean the lid and then wipe down the side, but they don't rotate the chaide like men do. And again, when you talk to Omotesenke teachers, the answer is always, well, there are many schools of thought that justify some of these variations. And one school of thought is that it is a sort of chauvinistic thing of like not letting women handle the objects or sort of suggesting that women might break it. But I personally like the view that, you know, if you ever see that handling, particularly of the chaide, where they wipe the fukusa down the whole length of the chaide itself, it's this incredibly beautiful, graceful movement. And I think it really accentuates not only feminine beauty and grace, but it like even accentuates the lines in their kimono and stuff. It's a beautiful gesture, and in a way far more visually appealing than watching somebody spin a chaide endlessly. So, you know, especially if it's a small chaide and really big hands, it always looks kind of clunky. But and for particularly during row, women have to move back and forth, like turning straight into the tamaisa mat and towards the row. You know, like every time they pick something up, they have to move to put things out, whereas men just sort of reach out and put things out. So it's a little fussier for women.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
Should we try a jiku or sengo, or what are we calling it these days?
Yeah, so since it's towards the end of the year, I thought I would bring in the one that my teacher usually puts up in December, which is buji kinin. And I've heard this phrase translated a couple of different ways, but buji means something like mind of non-attachment or mind of non-contrivance. Sort of the idea that not having an agenda, right? So that mind without an agenda creates kinin, or the noble person.
It's a nice one.
And it's a challenging one too.
So why does she choose it for December? It seems on the surface to be not so seasonal.
Yeah, I think that's true. It doesn't feel particularly seasonal to me either. But I think that there's an attitude in Japan of sort of letting go of all of our expectations and agendas towards the end of the year as we let go of the old year. So that mind which is free, that mind which has let go of all of that planning or that expectation, is the mind of nobility. Seems like a great way to end the year. No regrets, no expectations about the coming year, sort of clean slate. Feels reasonable to me that's how I understand it anyway.
Makes sense.
But I also find that mind without agenda, that's very challenging. There's always some expectation.
I like the expression, mind without an agenda.
Yeah. And
it opens for some other interpretations.
Yeah, and I wonder how it affects our time in the tea room, right? Like what agenda do we come into the tea room with? Do we have some expectation for our guests or for ourselves? Are we expecting that it has to be perfect, or is it enough that it's the best we can do? All that stuff comes into the room, right? Yeah. So it's a nice phrase, but it feels like it's very loaded. I also think, what is the kinin, right? What is that noble person? Who is that noble person in the room? I don't really think that this phrase is suggesting an aristocrat or, an actual member of the nobility. I think it's speaking to some deeper quality in a chajin in this context, and what we really think that nobility even looks like as tea people is an interesting question too.
Yeah, that's how I interpreted it when you translated. Not that it was nobility, but an attribute of the person.
Yeah.
Good. So I have to ask, did you do any spooky tea this year?
We did
very fabulous episode.
Thanks. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. I hope other people enjoyed it too. It was a really fun episode to record. I honestly felt like it was one of the most rich conversations we've gotten to have so far. We did do a little bit, but it was very low key, just sort of tea with friends, not a big formal gathering or anything like that. And it's just been a busy year. This year's been very busy, so I think we needed a break from trying to plan formal chaji, and it's it wasn't really a letdown. We had a really nice time. It was just very casual, but very spooky.
Sometimes that's what you need, right? It's not.
Yeah. What about you? Have you done any really exciting tea stuff?
No, I still struggling with my knee issues after overdoing Seiza on concrete floors in May. So I'm even struggling for one temai. So that's keeping up teaching, but then using the sabutons and cross-legged, I can get through a couple of temai, so that's always fun.
I've been using a yoga block when I teach, which has been helping a lot. Just sort of still sitting seiza, but putting the yoga block under my sits bones to sort of take that additional pressure off. And I like the yoga block because it's not a solid square, right? It's a rectangle, so you can turn it in different permutations if you need to be higher or lower. Maybe
I should try getting one.
Yeah, it seems to be a good fix for some people. So
worth exploring, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. There's no sense in being in pain, right? Tea is not about pain.
No, not primarily, at least.
Yeah. Do you have big plans? Are you going to do stuff for the holidays or big Christmas tea or New Year's?
Yeah, we usually do wife and I on the 25th. So in Norway, the presents and stuff and the main event is the 24th in the evening. But then on the 25th, it's a tradition to do a shorter shaji with emphasis on the food. Just wife as a guest.
Mm-hmm.
And then I try to do a New Year's Eve thing where we do sumi first, then koicha, and then it's out with champagne and fireworks for midnight, and then go sumi and usucha after midnight.
Awesome. That sounds great.
Bringing the fire from the last year into the next year.
Yeah, this is such a rich tradition. It's it's one I really want to learn more about, where this idea of carrying the fire over, so much of what happens at the New Year is about starting fresh, but there's this idea in tea of carrying over the fire. So this is it's homework I want to give to Alan Palmer Sensei. I want him to explain to us why we get rid of all of the things from the old year, but we keep the fire. I think it's a really, I'm sure there's a deep and rich meaning there. So I'm hoping that question will make its way to him.
We'll see.
Yeah.
But it's been nice learning a bit about the Omotesenke guest etiquette. Many facets that was new and different. And I suddenly realized I have a student who started Omotesenke and always does something particular during hiking, and now I know exactly why. So that was also fun.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining in, and
thank you. I appreciate the invitation.
I'm looking forward to hear the next episode you're recording when Anthony is back from Japan.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one, I'm sure. We're having a really good time. So, thank you so much, and thank you to all the listeners.
Yeah, thank you for listening.
This has been a production of TeaLife Audio. Producing an episode requires a bit of time and money. We do the work for free and hope you will help us cover the cost. Go to tealife.audio/support to help us bring another episode to your tea world. The taste of matcha when there is no one to talk tea. TeaLife Audio.